A lot of people who are super curious to start. Is there advice you would give them on their journey?
Yeah. As a general rule, this is a heavy generalization, but I'm going to give it to you. In my experience, most people benefit the most by starting with half guard first. I'm a big believer in the idea of start with pin escapes, then go to guard retention, and then start with half guard bottom.
On the journey from white belt to black belt, half guard is a position that nearly all Jiu-Jitsu students will spend considerable time in. Initially viewed as a stalling position, half guard quickly transformed into one of the most diverse and varied guards in all of Jiu-Jitsu. It has applications in gi, no gi, and in mixed martial arts. Whether you're young or old, short or tall, half guard has plenty to offer. The position has an ocean of possibilities. Like any sea, it can be very easy to get lost and lose your way. Allow this video to be your guide. These are the fundamentals of half guard. An obvious question is, well, why half guard? Why not butterfly guard? Or closed guard? After all, isn't closed guard the position most associated with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? As we saw from the introduction, John Danaher advocates for beginners to focus on pin escapes, guard retention, and then half guard. As Jiu-Jitsu coach to some of the top combat athletes of our time, it's safe to say he probably knows a thing or two. But let's try to understand his reasoning. Pin escapes are an obvious fundamental skill to develop. The definition of clinical depression is being stuck inside control with a larger athlete on top of you. The number one tool for pin escapes is the knee elbow escape. Trapped in mount, a successful elbow escape will put you in half guard. Opponent has your back, time to clear hooks and end up in half guard. Stuck in bottom turtle? Find an angle and get to half guard. There is a clear link between pin escapes and half guard. Okay, how about guard retention? Is someone trying to smash your closed guard? They will probably end up in half guard along the way. Is your butterfly guard getting bulldozed? Okay, let's kick through and make some connections in half guard. In John Danaher's instructional series, Go Further Faster, Guard Retention, he discusses counters for the 6 most common forms of guard pass. We can break these counters down into several categories. For the sake of simplicity, I've broken these down into 4 groups: early prevention, active prevention, late prevention, and emergency prevention. For the purposes of half guard fundamentals, memorizing all of these guard pass counters is not overly important. What is interesting is that many of the late stage prevention tactics, roll-through sweeps, sumigeshis, knee shields, and knee levers, are all much easier to achieve from half guard than most other guards. For pin escapes, guard retention to half guard sequence allows us to start building some fluidity to our defensive game. But what about offense? If we want to be successful, we can't just be defensive all the time. If we take a step back from bottom position and look at Jiu-Jitsu as a whole, we can ask ourselves broadly, what skills would we want to develop? Generally speaking, the back is the premier attacking position in all of grappling. The back gives us access to the highest percentage submissions in all of Jiu-Jitsu. rear naked strangles in no-gi and MMA are the most common finishes in the sport. Most sports competitions have the back as the highest scoring points position. In short, the back is a good place to be. If we have a way of reliably getting there from a guard position, that would be a valuable skill to develop. Single leg takedowns and double leg takedowns are great fundamental skills to have in general. Not only can these moves be performed from half guard safely, but they can often be employed with much more ease than from the standing position. Standing wrestling can be very tiring, whereas wrestling up from bottom position is often considered less taxing on the body. This is useful for those of us that started grappling later in life. Not only do we have access to back takes and wrestling reversals, half guard can also be used as a sweeping position. The most notable sweep being what is referred to as the roll-through sweep. In December 2015, an article was published on the website BJJ Eastern Europe. The article's title: 50% of sweeps in MMA come from half guard. According to the article, the data shows that while sweeps occurring in MMA tend to be quite low, the successful sweeps are much more likely to come from the half guard position. Back takes, wrestling reversals, and sweeps not only can all be used from half guard, they can all be used from the same position within half guard. This position is commonly referred to as the dogfight, but sometimes called the tight waist versus whizzer scenario. We'll talk about this position in detail later. While it's true that half guard can be good defensively and offensively, it would be useful to start to be specific in our understanding on what half guard is exactly. Half guard is far more than just a position where two of our legs control one of our opponent's legs. The two athletes can end up in many different arm and leg configurations, and yet still be considered in half guard. As we will soon discover, some of these configurations are better than others. So where do we start? If you study half guard for long enough, you'll eventually stumble across the famous John Danaher paradox. This is a useful measure for deciding what is a good half guard and what is a bad half guard. One athlete that embodies the John Danaher paradox is ADCC champion and UFC title contender Damian Maia. Damian made a career of wrestling up from the half guard position, yet if he wanted to pass guard, he would force the bottom athlete into half guard and pass from there. John Danaher is an advocate for half guard bottom. As we just discussed, there are plenty of reasons to consider using half guard as our guard of choice. Despite this, we also see John coaching his athletes to pass from half guard top. George St. Pierre and Gordon Ryan are famous for their half guard passing abilities. How can this be? How can one position be good for both the bottom athlete and the top athlete? Well, that's the paradox. Fortunately, we can resolve this pretty quickly. The basic principle is as follows. If the top athlete has control of the bottom athlete's head and shoulders, then they are in a great passing position. If the bottom athlete can deny access to their head and avoid chest-to-chest contact, then they're good to go. Half guard represents a great example of how knowledge of a position can boost your defense and offense at the same time. Being in bottom position with our head controlled will be the start of our study. If the opponent has control of our head, then we need to address this as soon as possible. Only once we're in a better position can we start going into our attacks. If we're in a situation where we have our head and shoulders controlled, we are in guard retention mode and we need to be playing defense at this point. Any attempts to launch an attack would be foolish. Unlike the 6 most popular forms of guard pass, passing from half guard is unique. The 6 passes mentioned all have a common theme: pass for legs, and then make the cranial shift to control the opponent's head. When passing from half guard, however, the cranial shift can occur before passing the legs. This is why denying an opponent's access to our head and denying chest-to-chest contact is so important if we want to avoid getting passed. On screen, we have what is considered to be a typical half guard position. This is a poor position for the bottom athlete. It is also a position we must be comfortable working in so that we can get to a preferred half guard. This position has been called a few names by various coaches, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to refer to this as flat half guard. Let's look at what the problems are. The bad news is that our opponent has an underhook and a crossface. Not only does this prevent us from turning into our opponent, but it allows them to exert tremendous pressure into our jawline. The longer we stay in this position, the worse it's going to be. Removing the opponent's crossface and underhook on a good opponent is going to be tough. A skilled opponent is not going to give up a winning position so easily. That's the bad news. The good news is that despite losing the battle for inside position at the upper body, there's a chance we can win it at the lower body. We can create a simple dilemma that forces the top athlete into only bad choices. If they leave their inside knee on the floor, they become vulnerable to knee levers. If they bring their knee off the floor, this gives us a chance to insert a butterfly hook. A knee lever is a very subtle but effective move to generate movement. By placing our feet just outside the opponent's knee, we overlap our toes, pinch our knees together, raise our hips off the mat, but instead of bridging, we just turn. If the opponent is naive and insists on keeping the underhook, we can often just roll them over into top position. Far more likely, the opponent will base out with their underhook arm, giving us a chance to get the underhook for ourselves. The underhook is a powerful tool from bottom position that allows us to take our opponents back. It is usually a good measure of who is winning from bottom position, and many battles will be fought for it. We'll talk about threatening the back later, but usually getting the underhook is enough to provoke a reaction from the top player. Realising that by keeping their knee on the ground, they are vulnerable to knee levers, a smart move by an opponent can be to bring their knee off the floor. This allows us to insert a butterfly hook. Butterfly half guard might be considered too advanced for fundamentals, but don't worry, we're not going to be here long. Once our hook is inserted, we can immediately begin off-balancing and elevating our opponent to get out of the flat half guard position. The butterfly hook allows us to off-balance an opponent in multiple directions. We can use our inside leg to clamp over the opponent's calf muscle or plant it on the floor to bridge and elevate the opponent even higher. Once the opponent is moving, their control is going to be diminished. We want to avoid getting stuck in a static pin with our shoulders down on the mat. To recap, if the opponent's knee is down, knee lever. If their knee is up, aim for the butterfly hook. A smart opponent is not going to simply allow you to elevate them or give up a crossface and underhook without a good reason. In fact, they may upgrade from flat half guard to put us in an even worse position. The opponent may take out their crossface arm and bring it over our head. They could do this for a few reasons. They may be reacting to our movements. They may want to do a particular guard pass. They may even want to isolate and attack our arm with Kimura sequences. During the later stages of his career, Damian Maia would force these positions while passing, specifically to accomplish two tasks. The main goal was to deny the opponent access to the underhook and subsequent wrestle-ups. This strategy was in response to Damian's own preferred way of wrestling up from half guard bottom, If he found himself in top position, he was often quick to shut down his opponent's ability to use his own game against him. The secondary effect was that it meant as the top athlete, he could punch his opponent, but his opponent could not punch him back. When the top athlete passes their arm across, it typically will go into one of two positions. As the arm comes across, they can place their elbow by our neck, wedging it in place. They still prevent us from turning, but they are now facing away from us. This position is called the reverse crossface. Instead of wedging their elbow at our neck, they may place it under our armpit. This position is known as the reverse underhook. So what do we do? If either of these scenarios occur, we need to be ready. If the opponent uses a reverse crossface, we can use the same trick we learned earlier. If the knee is on the ground, we can start going into a knee lever. If the knee comes up, we can insert a butterfly hook. The butterfly hook will be a bit different this time. Instead of immediately elevating over us, we may want to elevate in the direction they are facing first. The key, as always, is being able to off-balance the opponent in multiple directions. For both moves, the knee lever and the butterfly hook, we can even use our free arm to assist by posting and pushing on the tricep of the opponent's crossface arm, Marcelo Garcia style. If athletes are struggling to insert a butterfly hook, it is possible to use a knee lever while the opponent's knee is in the air. This simply requires doing the move twice. The first lever will bring the knee to the floor, and the second lever will begin moving them. This can be a bit tricky, so don't worry if you can't hit it on your training partners immediately. Like all things in Jiu-Jitsu, they usually require a bit of practice. If the opponent elects to use the reverse underhook, previous trick might not work so well. Typically, the top athlete has given up on attacking our arm and is exerting greater control on our hips. It's more realistic to say they will be looking to pass or even go for a leg lock in this position. This greater control of our hips comes at a price, and that price is that our head is free. By keeping our elbows tight, if the opponent sits to side control, they will have no head control, and it can be an easy escape. Far more likely, the opponent will seek to mount via the 3/4 mount position, re-establish head control, and then finish the pass from there. In the reverse underhook position, we have a couple of options to explore. First, we can begin back heisting into a reverse elbow escape style motion, or second, we can focus on the top athlete's reverse underhook arm and attempt a continuation of the Marcelo Garcia tricep post and stiff arm method. A successful Marcelo post will typically land us back in open guard. The reverse elbow escape, however, threatens the opponent's back. This lends itself to the fluidity of game that we spoke about earlier. We can threaten this early by taking a belt grip in the gi or a reverse tight waist grip no gi. A good opponent is likely to retreat to an open guard scenario rather than let you take their back. In both cases, we've definitely improved our position. We've now covered what to do when we're in inferior positions. This has been with a focus on the position of the opponent's middle knee and their crossface arm. These aren't the only methods we can use while discussing a flat half guard scenario. If the top athlete makes a mistake and doesn't keep their outside knee tight to our body, it is relatively easy to bring our bottom knee through and elbow escape, ending up in 3/4 guard. By moving in this direction, rather than battling for the underhook, the options for half guard offense are split into two distinct paths. By moving towards 3/4 guard, we are entering what John calls the single elbow series. By moving towards the underhook, we are entering the underhook series. Skilled half guard students will be able to consciously pick which direction the roll goes in, whether it's towards the underhook or to the single elbow series. On the initial stages of our half guard journey, we may simply have to react to what the top athlete gives us. The underhook series is more exemplified in MMA, as athletes will leave space for an underhook when they throw strikes. Over time, we want to develop our skills so that we have multiple directions of attack and can consciously play between the two paths. Whether we move towards the single elbow series or the underhook series will largely be determined by what position we want to finish in. To illustrate this point, it's useful if we take a look at Jiu-Jitsu as a whole. For the most part, Jiu-Jitsu can be best described as a systems-based approach to fighting. Within this larger system of Jiu-Jitsu, there are several subsystems that operate. These subsystems can be positional or can be submissions-based. For instance, a back attack system or a closed guard sweep system. Success in Jiu-Jitsu is often about pulling an opponent into a subsystem where they have a severe disadvantage in either skill or in knowledge. Damian Maia, for example, is a back attack specialist. If he gets on your back, it's a serious problem. In MMA matches, he would relentlessly pursue the back above all other positions. If opponents were better than him at striking, which was often the case, he would pull them out of their striking domain and into one of his preferred positions. What half guard serves as is a tremendous link between subsystems. It is a navigational hub that allows us to flow so much more freely into our areas of expertise. With regard to the underhook series and the single elbow series, we can chart the paths as follows. The single elbow series leads back towards the guard. From the 3/4 guard position, we have several paths we can take. For instance, we can start aiming towards a more traditional closed guard, we can start going into Sumigaeshi attack sequences, or we can start moving towards a double elbow escape series, where we can start aggressively attacking from a clamp control position. By moving towards the single elbow series, we move actively away from the underhook series, and vice versa. The underhook series is the path to the back. Along the way, we'll potentially encounter the tight waist series, or the scoop half guard series. Before we get too excited and start entering the weeds of series and subsystems, it would be helpful to go through some of these positions of half guard, and then from those positions, how we're going to get to the underhook series. It's unlikely that we'll start a roll in either flat half guard or any of the reverse half guard scenarios we've discussed. In fact, it would be quite sensible to have some strategies to stop our opponents putting us in those positions in the first place. Our main initial defensive responsibilities from half guard will be to prevent our opponent from grabbing our head and to prevent them from making chest-to-chest contact. In order to do this, it would be smart to have some form of distance management. This is where we can use our hands, elbows, knees, and feet to post on our opponent and make frames. A very popular way to do this is to use our top knee as a barrier between us and our opponent. Handily, this is called a knee shield. Typically the knee can be in one of two positions, depending on your style of play. A knee at the hip is known as a low knee shield. Fans of Craig Jones will recognise this as being called a Z-guard. A knee in the opponent's chest or sternum area is known as a high knee shield. In a gi, this combines well with a cross collar grip, making a strong knee and elbow connection. Without a gi, knee shields tend to be combined with either a cross shoulder post or some form of wrist control. How we use our frames is very important, with special attention being paid to the position of our top arm. The top athlete will look to take advantage of any mistakes in arm positioning that we make. If we leave our elbow too wide, it becomes easy for the top athlete to take their own underhook. If we insist on keeping it too tight to our body and use a weak frame, we risk getting squashed. If we move our arm too far over, we become vulnerable to darce chokes. Most of these scenarios are avoided by using good frames and being aware of the dangers presented. There are many attacks we can employ from either of these knee shield positions. For the purposes of this video, we're only going to focus on getting to the underhook series. As we begin our half guard journey, it can be easy to become overwhelmed with the possibilities of the position. Going for the underhook series has some risk attached to it. In order to get the underhook, we have to give up our knee shield. By getting rid of the knee shield, we lose our primary form of distance management. If we keep our knee shield in place, we cannot get the underhook, so how we manage the transition will be crucial. It's important to note that we don't want to just be satisfied with the underhook. We want to be able to use it properly. Going for a lazy underhook and not maintaining correct head position is a good way to end up in a darce strangle. So let's avoid that. We want to get our shoulders off the mat into an elbow prop position. Our head wants to be in our opponent's chest, and we want to begin working to a tight waist position. By having our shoulders off the mat and our head at an angle, it becomes much easier to carry our opponent's weight. From a high knee shield, we can simply long arm frame and kick through to the underhook. From a low knee shield, we will need to be a bit sneakier. By connecting our knee and elbow, we can extend our knee and swim our hand through to a tight waist position. A tight waist is simply a deep underhook, where instead of only being under our opponent's armpit, we are actively around their entire waist. The tight waist series is the main attacking position we want to get to. The 3 skills we described in the introduction, taking the back, roll-through sweeps, and wrestling reversals, can all come from this one position. Not only that, should one of these options fail, we can always swap to one of the other 2. We can essentially trap our opponent in a loop where they can only make bad choices. Unfortunately for us, a good opponent is not going to simply allow you to do whatever you want from the tight waist position for free. They may employ use of what is commonly referred to as a whizzer as a defensive tactic. If you're new to grappling, you may be asking, what is a whizzer? The whizzer is a fundamental move, originally from the sport of wrestling. If one athlete gets an underhook, then an overhook is available to the other athlete. This action of inserting an overhook is called the whizzer. There are many applications of a whizzer, ranging from single leg takedown defense to setting up judo style throws. The main usage in our half guard fundamental series is that it prevents the bottom athlete simply coming up and taking the back. As we enter our preferred tight waist attacking position, the whizzer is a common response that we need an answer for. This situation is aptly named the tight waist versus whizzer scenario, sometimes referred to as the dogfight. From this position, we can utilise the full effects of the tight waist trilemma. We want to be able to threaten our opponent with back takes, roll-through sweeps, and wrestling reversals from this position. In addition, once we have the tight waist position, we have the option to use our outside leg to hook around our opponent's inside leg. This is referred to as a Kosoto hook. The Kosoto hook allows us to drive our own knee to the ground and create extension in our opponent's leg. This forces the top athlete to defend in an unathletic position and gives us slightly different options when we use our attacks. If we can insert a Kosoto hook, that would be ideal, although sometimes our opponent may start reacting before we get a chance to. As a result, we need to be comfortable working with and without a Kosoto hook. Because the opponent has a whizzer in place, they have temporarily shut off our ability to attack the back. Fortunately for us, we still have access to our other two modes of attack. When we initially enter the tight waist versus Whizzers scenario, our opponent is very likely to have both knees still on the floor. In this situation, our priority is to wrestle. The goal is to capture the opponent's far knee as if we were attempting a double leg takedown. This single action alone is going to generate some very predictable responses that we can begin to take advantage of. If the opponent is naive, we can simply complete the double leg takedown and begin climbing the body into a pin, completing the reversal. Far more likely, the opponent will attempt one of three things. Firstly, they could simply try and stand up. This scenario may be more common in MMA, but can also occur in pure Jiu-Jitsu matches. Secondly, knowing the danger of the double leg, they can post their far leg. The idea here is that by keeping their leg away from us, the double leg takedown is no longer an option. Thirdly, they may seek to kill the danger early. By being strong with their whizzer, they may attempt to drive us back to the mat and begin passing our guard. Let's now have a look at some basic wrestle ups and start building our attack sequences off these reactions. The primary goal of the wrestle up is to capture the opponent's knee and put their hips down to the ground via a double leg takedown. We can even fish for the opponent's wrist and begin flattening them out. This move isn't exclusive to the tight waist versus Whizzer series. Some athletes will be able to get here by coming up out of side control bottom, again lending some fluidity with our pin escapes. When we're in this situation, we have the option of working with or without our Kosoto hook. If we take the hook out, we have the opportunity to be a bit more aggressive. By winning the battle for knee position and head height, we can enter body lock reversals or front headlocks. Both of these are great options and will build a sense of fluidity with future skills we want to develop. The body lock is a fantastic weapon in the standing position, when guard passing, or in this case, reversing our opponent. The front headlock allows us to start attacking guillotines, or even just control our opponent and start to move around them. Should the opponent win the battle for knee position, then we can simply attack an outside roll-through sweep. A successful roll-through sweep here will put us in top position. Should the roll-through sweep fail, we have the option of climbing back up and returning to the initial tight waist versus Whizzer scenario. If we keep the Kosoto hook in, then we can play between attacking a single leg takedown and a double leg takedown. By having a good head position, we're able to circle in one direction to go for the double leg and cut back in the other for the single leg. This dual threat is hard to deal with, even for the most skilled of practitioners. Even if it all fails, we still have the option to return to half guard and start attacking our sequences again. We've already mentioned him in this video, but Damian Maia is a great athlete to study for not just taking the back, but for implementing this wrestle up philosophy from half guard. There have been many times where Maia has had his initial standing takedown attempt defended, only for him to sit back to half guard and begin wrestling up from there. Very often, he will be successful with this approach. We spoke earlier about how one of the reactions to our double leg attempts would be for the opponent to stand up. If the opponent stands up, then we have the option of standing up with them. Often we will have grips for a takedown already established. If the opponent happens to be wearing a gi, we can feed the bottom of our opponent's lapel in between their legs. This enables the gi to act as a force multiplier to prevent the opponent from sprawling out of the position. As soon as we've achieved our wrestle up, we've now safely exited the half guard position. It's now time to begin exploring different reactions. As we attempt the initial double leg, a smart reaction of the opponent could be to post their far leg. This would deny us access to the far knee, making completion of a double leg takedown somewhat difficult. Combined with the whizzer, we would still be unable to access the opponent's back. Thankfully, by posting their leg, they become vulnerable to the third horn of the trilemma. The posted leg makes it easy to shift under them, and the whizzer will prevent them from putting their hand out for base. This is the perfect time to go for the roll-through sweep. This isn't the only time we can go for a roll-through sweep either. It is possible to jump past the tight waist versus whizzer scenario and enter a roll-through sweep while in bottom half guard with just an underhook. If we simply apply a scoop grip around the opponent's outside knee, this moves us into scoop half guard. From here we can sidestep into positions like a deep half guard or begin roll-through sweeping immediately, depending on our skill level. Another option available from scoop half guard is to kick our own inside leg down past our opponent's trapped knee. This looks like a knee cut pass for the athlete on top, but the pass won't be much use as we have the underhook and control of both of our opponent's legs. This action is known as the lower leg shift. Typically, the lower leg shift is a checkpoint on the way to completing a roll-through sweep, but it also allows us to move more freely between taking the back and wrestling up. This position is sometimes referred to as the coyote guard, made famous by Lucas Letti. The story of every successful roll-through sweep is the same. In John Danaher's Go Further Faster half guard, he summarises the 4 checkpoint positions as follows. First, the 90-degree roll. Second, the knee lift. Third, the hip shift. And finally, the law of the elbow. Ideally, we want to bring our opponent into an unathletic position before we start the move. If we're wrestling up, by bringing our Kosoto knee down to the floor and aggressively drawing our heel to our butt, we can force the opponent's knee to be bent at 90 degrees. Hence the name, the 90-degree roll. If we're going to enter the sweep from scoop half guard, we need to kick our leg down via a low leg shift and free our opponent's knee while maintaining control of their ankle. Once our opponent's trapped leg has been dealt with, it's time to focus on the outside leg. Our opponent's reaction will determine our success at this next point. Our initial indicator for the roll-through sweep was that our opponent's knee was off the floor. In doing this, they have performed the knee lift for us. If at any point the knee comes back to the floor, it's time to abandon the roll-through sweep and come back to the double leg takedown we discussed earlier. If the top athlete keeps their knee off the ground, we can either post on the knee in no gi or utilise the gi pant if we're wearing a gi. Once the knee lift is complete, we then need to shift the angle of our hips. We need to go from facing our opponent to facing the ceiling. We can do this via a reverse shrimp method. However, it can be possible to get here with the momentum of diving underneath our opponent. Once our hips are facing the ceiling, it's time to complete the sweep and come up to top position. A series of shrimps will allow us to do this efficiently. The law of the elbow is apparent at the final step. To finish the sweep, we want to send the opponent over in the direction our elbow points. The opponent should be aimed towards the bottom quadrant where his leg is trapped. A successful roll-through sweep will put us in top position. At any point during the sweep, the opponent may take out their whizzer and use their hand for base, preventing the sweep. A smart opponent may play between keeping the whizzer in and out. This is where the threat of a back take comes into play. If the opponent is able to bring their arm out, their back is exposed. If they put the arm back in, the roll-through sweep becomes viable again. Should we meet resistance at any point, we can always return to the tight waist versus whizzer position and go back to threatening double leg takedowns, back takes, or even going for another roll-through sweep. The final reaction we're going to explore is if, off the initial double leg attempt, our opponent tries to use the whizzer to flatten us out and force us back to the mat. If this scenario occurs, our opponent becomes vulnerable to the limp arm, giving us the opportunity to take our opponent's back. By bringing our shoulder below our head and changing the angle of our arm, it is possible to whip our arm free from our opponent's whizzer. When this occurs, we have the chance to take our opponent's back. But we need to act fast. A good opponent is going to recognise the danger that they are in. Once our arm is free, we can take double underhooks in the chest to back position and place our head over our opponent's far shoulder. Instead of the limp arm method, it is possible that even if the opponent keeps the whizzer in, we can step around the opponent and take the back from the opposite side. But that's a future skill to develop. Whilst taking the back would be our most preferred option of the three, it is often the least achieved in practice. For starters, many opponents are going to simply keep the whizzer, leaving the roll-through sweep and wrestle-up options much easier to complete. In most cases, it is much often preferable to take the path of least resistance. From a defensive point of view, opponents are much more likely to allow themselves to be swept or reversed, rather than risk having their back taken. Even so, if your opponent takes the whizzer arm out, always know the back is available. Even if you don't plan on taking the back, merely the threat is enough to make opponents overreact. If we ever beat the whizzer, don't be in a rush to climb up and meet the opponent on the knees. Instead, it is much easier to use our head as a post behind our opponent's deltoid. From this position, putting the whizzer back in becomes tremendously difficult. We also have the added option of being able to drag the opponent back towards us, rather than climbing on top of a turtle posture. Once we're on the back, we've successfully exited the half guard position, and it's time to put our opponent on the defensive. Once again, here's Damian Meyer to show us how it's done. We've now come to the end of this half-guard adventure, having only dipped our toes into the water of the position. The back takes, the roll-throughs, and wrestle-ups are but a glimpse of the techniques and possibilities available to the position. The moves of the tight waist trilemma are there to complement each other. By getting good at one, we improve the efficacy of the other. Each move will have its own deep dive, and hopefully this video will have sown some seeds of inquiry. This was never meant to be a comprehensive guide, but a small piece of a much larger puzzle. A comfortable half guard is the foundation of any advanced guard player. If things are going catastrophically wrong, then we can always find a safe haven in half guard. A position that is easy to learn, but difficult to master. The tight waist versus whizzer system isn't the only way to party. At the end of the day, half guard is an interface that allows us to move between subsystems more freely. The weaknesses of other guards are often covered by the strengths of half guard, and vice versa. This video can hopefully serve as a small step on your path to Jiu-Jitsu mastery. Whether you decide to take the route of deep half guard, like Ryan Hall, Z-guard, like Craig Jones, Whizfly half, like Gordon Ryan. Whether you follow the road of Eddie Bravo and the lockdown. Whether you look to the old school generation, like Lucas Letty, Bernardo Faria, or even Damian Maia. The steps you take and the choices you make, I leave to you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. For updates on the channel, feel free to check out my community tab. Cheers.